Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Money and Stuff with me, your host, Sam Rodriguez, certified financial planner. And with me, Conor Shepard. Today, we're following up on a topic we've been talking about all month. We've been talking about Social Security. Been in the news a lot lately with potential shortfalls coming. People are scared, right?
Yeah, a lot of stuff in the news, just about the what ifs of if it runs out and the implications of what that could mean, for
Yeah.
retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big deal, right? When you think about Social Security, it's a major part of most people's um, financial plan, right? For some people, it's their entire financial plan. For like 95% of the population, it is going to be the majority of their income in retirement. So people are really worried about it. So I think today let's talk about why Social Security is facing a shortfall. We'll talk about some common myths in terms of why it's facing a shortfall, why it's really facing a shortfall, what happens if it doesn't get shored up. We'll talk about all the ideas that are on the table that could fix it, and then I don't know what else. We'll just talk about it. We'll just discuss it, right?
Yeah, we'll start tackling
Yeah.
it.
All right. So let's start with why there is a shortfall.
When you say shortfall, you're just referring to it running out of money, correct?
So yeah, kind of, right? Kind of running out of money. I'll say this: Social Security will never run out of money. It cannot go bankrupt,
Mhm.
right? So the idea that Social Security is bankrupt is always going to be false, because the way Social Security works is all of the taxes that people that are working, you and I paying these payroll taxes, right? We're paying Social Security taxes. That pays for the people who are actually receiving benefits from Social Security. So as long as there are American workers, right? People
Yeah.
in the US working, paying into Social Security, there will always be money in Social Security, right? So it'll never go broke.
So the shortfall is, it's not that it's running out of money, it's that there is more money being pulled out than money going in.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly the problem, right? As long as there's workers, there will always be money coming in. Issue is like in 2010, we we tipped the other way, right? To where we did have more going out than what is coming in. Before that, we've always had a surplus of money coming in versus what was going out, right? And I think people need to know that Social Security, it is enormous in the amount of benefits that are paid out. We're up to, I think, $112 billion in Social Security benefits per month being paid out.
Dang.
Yeah, that is a tremendous number, right? So we do have a $2.8 trillion surplus that's been stored up for all of those years when we had more coming in than what was going out. But in 2010, that's when the scale sort of tipped. And it was like, okay, now we have more going out than coming in. And that's for a number of reasons that we can get into. And I'll talk about those in a minute. But what we're facing right now is because of that change, because we have more going out than what's coming in 2034, that surplus that we've built up is expected to go away.
Okay.
But what we do have coming in, so sort of worst case scenario, what we do have coming in will still be able to pay somewhere between 75 to 80% of benefits. So worst case scenario is if we don't create a new surplus, what will happen is benefits will be cut by 20 to 25%, which is not a small amount, right? It won't go away, but benefits could be cut.
Yeah. Okay. And so do we want to get into some of the reasons that there's a shortfall, some of the causes?
Yeah, let's do that. So why is there more going out than what's coming in? And if you think about it, the reasons are, I think, kind of obvious. Like we all know that we're living longer. So right now, the average life expectancy is 78.9 years, which when I think about that, like let's round up to 79
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
right?
I was about to say, like, really, we can't give them the 0.1
Yeah,
benefit of the
yeah.
doubt.
78.109 or wait, 10 months and 24 days. You think about, living to 79. I feel like most of us know a lot of people that live past that.
Yeah.
So 79 really doesn't feel like a long life expectancy compared to what we see a lot of people live now.
Yeah.
And I think when you think about life expectancy, you also have to remember that number includes a lot of people who died when they were kids.
Yeah. It's an average.
Yeah, so it's an average. But you compare that to what it was in 1900, the average life expectancy for a US citizen was age 47. I
Yeah.
would have 2 years. I would have 2 years feeling like I really feel like an old man right now. So, increases in medicine, we're taking care of ourselves better, better living conditions, better work conditions. All of these things have just led to increased life expectancy.
Mhm.
And when Social Security started, I think the life expectancy was 65.
Yeah.
Right? So it wasn't necessarily something that was, hey, this is going to last you a long time. It was, I don't know, almost like a prize, like, hey, you made it. You beat everyone else out. Take a break. Here's some cash. Like, you beat the stats. Here you go,
Literally,
bud.
literally.
Right? Yeah. So you think about going from 65 to 79. I mean, that's a major change over that period of time. So
Oh, yeah.
we have people living longer, which means we're paying out more benefits over time. We have what so far has been the largest generation reaching Social Security age in the baby boomers. I think the stat is something like 10,000 baby boomers a day are turning 65. Like,
Yeah.
that is a tremendous amount of people that are reaching that age of where they can start taking their Social Security that are now receiving benefits. So you've got the combination of a large percentage of the population at that age where they're taking benefits, and they're living a long, long time. Right. And then the third thing, which I think people don't think about that much, but it's sort of a sign of any what I'd call dominant economic power, is our birth rate has also declined significantly. So we've gone from the average woman having 3.7 kids in 1960 to 1.68 kids today. So, less than half of what we were, we're producing less than half the kids per household than we were producing, 70 years ago. Is that 70 years? 60 years ago? Than we were producing 60 years ago, right? So why is that significant? The way Social Security works, like we said a minute ago, is it's dependent on workers today paying in order to pay benefits out to the people who are retired today. And there are all sorts of problems with having a declining birth rate, all sorts of economic problems. But for purposes of today, the main problem with that is we have fewer workers paying into Social Security.
Hearing that, I mean, it sounds like we're getting the worst of both worlds, where we're seeing lower birth rate, which equals less people contributing to that, paying for Social Security, putting money in, at the same time that we're seeing a huge number of the population going into retirement, reaping those benefits. So we're basically getting hit on either sides of that Social Security dilemma.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it's what do we do? Right. I mean, what do we do? I don't about any of those three things. I don't know. Right. We can't stop people from getting older. Right. What are we going to do? Stop advancing medicine so that way people don't continue to live longer? And then do we encourage people to have more kids? Right. So of those three things that are having the major impact, we can't really do much about. Right.
Hey, so you mentioned earlier we would discuss some of the myths surrounding it. I mean, I know one that I never get tired of hearing is that illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, are taking Social Security in droves and draining the account. So I guess, what can you speak to some of these myths that you might hear about, or
there's really two big ones, right? And you hit on one of them, which is that undocumented or illegal aliens are draining Social Security. The other is that the government is raiding the Social Security fund and using for other things. I'll talk about both of them. Number one, as far as receiving retirement benefits from Social Security, undocumented immigrants just don't. Like, it doesn't happen. And if it does, if some of them are able to get it, it's few and far between. And I'm not quite sure how they would do it if they don't have a true Social Security number. Right now, some undocumented workers use people's Social Security numbers in order to get jobs. But in effect, what that actually does is increases the Social Security trust fund, because they are using someone else's Social Security number to find work. I think in 2010, I don't have an updated number, but in 2010, that contributed like $12 billion a year into Social Security. These undocumented workers using somebody else's Social Security number to find employment. I'm not advocating or saying that that's okay or that makes it all right or anything, but it does actually increase or help the benefit. The trouble is $12 billion. While it sounds like a big number, like I said, we spend 112 a month. So 12 billion in the year, it's less than 1%, but it's still helping out.
Yeah.
So the other thing is government rating. So we hear a lot of people, it's always a talking point. The government is misspending these Social Security dollars, and Social Security would be fine if they weren't rating it all the time. And Social Security is just full of all these IOUs from the government. That's not the way it works. They cannot actually touch the funds that are in that Social Security trust fund. They can't touch them. However, what we do with that money that's in the Social Security trust fund is we invest it in government securities. Just like if you or I were to buy government bonds, the Social Security trust fund buys government bonds. Now, when we buy government bonds, essentially the government is borrowing the money and gets to do whatever they want with it, but they always have to pay it back, and they pay it back with interest.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not taking money out of it and misspending it. It is, I know it sounds like the same thing, but it's not, right? What's happening is we're investing that money in government bonds, so that way the government can operate, but the government is always paying it back with interest. And I think that is also, a small contributing factor to the shortfall. You think about the last 15 years or so, and interest rates have been just rock bottom, right?
Yeah.
So buying government bonds hasn't really paid off very well. So as interest rates rise, yes, it's a strain on government, but as far as Social Security goes, it will actually help Social Security kind of shore things up a little bit. So there's no government rating and misspending dollars. There's no IOUs. The only IOUs in there are the same IOUs that everybody else has in their portfolio when they buy government bonds. I think it's just, you get politicians who like to spin things so that way you get all worked up and vote for them versus the other guy. It's always great to make somebody else the evil person, right? But that's just not the way it works.
Yeah, Social Security has definitely been turned more and more into a political tool, less than an actual providing of security.
Well, it's scary, right? There's no better way to get elected than to scare people into voting for you because they're scared of the other guy, right? And when you think about something that people are going to have to depend on and rely on for the rest of their lives, you think about yourself in old age and knowing that you're not going to be working and the only income you may have coming in is Social Security. And someone's telling you they may take that away. It becomes very, very scary. And if this guy is telling me, hey, that guy wants to take away your Social Security, I'm going to make sure you still have it. That's one of your biggest fears of being able to take care of yourself. You go that way, but it just gets spun in ways that are, you want to say that they're not true. It's not that what they say is exactly a lie. It's just not really the truth.
It's omitting part of it.
Yeah. So what happens? I think we covered this a little bit. What happens if it doesn't get shored up? Well, and projections right now are by 2034, that $2.8 trillion surplus that we have in the trust fund is going to run out, and benefits would have to get cut because we'd only be bringing in 75 to 80% of what it takes to cover it. Yeah. So let's talk about ideas. Let's talk about the things that are on the table, right?
Yeah.
Things that could possibly fix it. And they're not complicated. The fixes are not very complicated at all, right? Like we talked about this either last episode or a couple of episodes ago about, they faced the same thing back in the early 80s, right? In the 70s, they were kind of facing a very similar issue where what was coming in was beginning to match up to what was going out. So they created a formula to figure out how much of your Social Security income would be taxed to go back into the trust fund. And that shored us up for a while. And then in the 90s, they sort of recalibrated what that formula was for the taxes on Social Security. So we went from, the late 70s, early 80s to the mid 90s to now, right? Like making these 20 to 30 year jumps of shoring this thing up. So it's not like we haven't had this in the past, right? So it's a simple math equation, right? Figure out how you can bring more in.
Get more, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, how do we get more in, or how do we pay less out, or how do we do both, right? So one of the big things is raising the retirement age, right? So we've done it in the past, right? We've taken it from 65 to 66 to 67. So raising the retirement age is, or what they call the full retirement age, right? When you're entitled to the full benefit that, or what would we call that? It's so difficult, right? To explain what that is, because you can start taking it as early as 62 or as late as 70, and it changes depending on when you take it. But there's sort of a full retirement benefit that everything is based on,
Yeah.
right? Like what is that? What is that benefit? And right now, right, it's, for most people that are about to retire, it's that age is somewhere between 66 and 67, right? So they're talking about raising that, right? 68, 69, 70, somewhere around that. And the math is simple. If you say, hey, we're going to raise the age to 69, well, that means if you take it any earlier than that, you're going to receive a reduced benefit. If we're paying out reduced benefits, that means that there's less going out. Or if you wait until 69, then that means we have several years where people aren't taking their benefit, which means we're paying less out. So that's one side of the equation, is how do we pay less out? The other way that they're talking about paying less out is to do something called means testing. So what means testing means, that's an awkward phrase. So I'm trying to think of another way to say it, but I can't. What means testing means is that
the fact that you slowed down when you said it, means testing.
Yeah,
means
there's got to be another way to say that, right? But what means testing,
signifies.
Still can't think of another word. Can you think of a word?
Signifies.
Maybe.
Represents.
It feels like it doesn't. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think everybody knows what I'm trying to say. But what it means would happen is that when people reach their Social Security age, they would come up with some sort of way of testing who qualifies for Social Security. Right now you have the qualifications, right? There's certain things you have to have paid in for a certain amount of time. You have to have reached certain ages, things like that. But what this means testing would do is it would look at things like your income or your net worth, right? And say, based on that, should you receive, what portion of your benefit should you receive? And the idea is to get back to the original premise of Social Security, which is try to help those who have very little means to take care of themselves, right? I guess we can talk about the pros and cons of it, right? We didn't talk about the pros and cons of waiting, increasing the age, right? Yeah. But from a standpoint of, this means testing, I feel like the way Social Security works right now, it's like the more you pay in, the more you're going to get out. And it feels very fair, right? You disconnect those two things, what you paid in to what you get out. And I think we'll have a time period where, it doesn't feel very fair, right? Like I paid in just like everybody else. Why am I not getting anything out? And, it would make Social Security feel a lot more like other social programs we have, right? Like welfare type programs, and, I know welfare for some people can have a negative connotation, but, you think essentially of what the word welfare means. It's for the welfare of these people and their fellow Americans, right? And I'm not trying to say what you should or shouldn't think, or even what I think. It would just be that there would have to be a shift in how we thought about Social Security. And the reality is it's for all of our benefit for people to be okay in their retirement, because otherwise we got to find other ways for people to be taken care of, which probably means increased taxes. And we want these people to have money. We want people to have money in retirement. We want them to spend money, because Americans spending money is what drives our economy. So I'm not saying that this is the fix. I'm just saying I know that it would be that disconnect between what you put in versus what comes out would be extremely unpopular. But making sure this segment of the population is okay really is to everyone's benefit in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and just to circle back to something that you had said earlier, it's easy when you hear like stories or you see on the news, you have examples. There are people out there who take advantage of these systems. And that's a human problem. That's not a welfare problem, Social Security problem. Like at the end of the day, people find ways to take advantage. But when you look at the original purpose of Social Security, the welfare program, they were made as literally a safety net to stop the vast majority of people in the country from falling completely into poverty and losing everything. And I think you're absolutely right. Getting it back to a system that is at the very least providing some kind of stability to those people right on the edge of homelessness, whatever it is. But getting it back to its original purpose, I think was a very important thing that you said.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. Like, yes, I mean, yes, I want people to be taken care of, but even stepping away from that, from an economic standpoint, we need that,
Yeah,
right? We need these people to be okay, because we need them to spend money.
we need them to consume
That's right.
product.
That's right. You know what? Let's go back to talking about retire. Yeah, I feel like we talked about like how people think about this means testing, but we didn't talk anything about what happens if we raise this retirement age, like when people hit full retirement.
I just
You
kind of
know, I
figured,
don't.
I just figured we could look at France to get an idea of how people feel about that.
Oh, good gosh, yeah. So if you guys have not, what were those ages again? They're moving it from what age to what age? Do you remember?
62 to 64.
Yeah. So I guess their equivalent of full retirement age in France is 62, and they're running into similar problems as us, right? They need to shore up their equivalent of what Social Security is. So they're moving the age to 64, and there are riots happening, right? Like, I mean,
Oh
just
yeah.
outright riots. We saw that just a few years ago in Greece. I don't know if people remember the news several years ago about, Greece was having all sorts of financial problems, but one of the things they needed to fix was their retirement program. And I think their ages were like in the 50s or something. And they moved it a few. Same thing, like riots, like people going crazy, right? And I get it, right? You're kind of telling people, hey, you're going to work longer, right?
Yeah.
And I think,
Or
you
at the
know,
very least, you're telling them, hey, if you want the same benefit that you would have gotten at this age, you have to work 2 more years.
yeah, but the way our system works, you don't necessarily have to work 2 more years. You just have to wait to receive the benefit, right?
Mhm.
2 more years. So, man, and Social Security was never really meant to be a retirement fund, right?
Mhm.
Um, I don't know that really should hold any weight, right? I know people for making all of these changes will say this was never meant to be a retirement fund. It was meant to be a safety net, like you just said. Um, but the fact is, it's changed in people's minds,
Yep.
right? Like no matter what the original intent of it was, this is what it is now, right?
Yes.
I mean, the idea of retirement is a fairly new concept when you think,
100. Absolutely.
right? Historically, people have worked until they couldn't anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Retirement
And I
was
think,
just being at your farm full time.
well, I think most people were at their farm full time, right? But
But that was
until
the
we
job.
became an
Retirement, it was like,
industrialized,
now
yeah.
I'm here retired.
Now I can't do this anymore. I have kids; they're going to do it now, But what worries me about it is there's a large percentage of people who already feel like they need to work past age 65 in order to make retirement even a possibility,
Yeah.
right? But the statistics show that a large portion of people who think they're going to work to 65 or later don't actually get to. And it's for a number of reasons. One is health, and it's either their own health or a family member's health where they have
Yeah.
to slow down and take care of somebody else. The other thing is a lot of times it's just not their choice. It's difficult to find a job when you're in your late 50s, early 60s if you lose one job. It's just not easy to get hired. And unfortunately, when a lot of people lose their job in their late 50s, early 60s, it's just tough. They just can't find either they can't find employment at all, or they can't find an equivalent of what they've had before. So for a
Yeah.
lot of people, it just really isn't a choice to work that long. So I can see from a math perspective, moving that date works, but from a reality perspective, people being able to work that long, we're sort of already at that breaking point where we have the full retirement age, for people born 1960 and after is age 67. But by far, the majority of people are just not working that long.
Yeah.
Like, you just, for a number of reasons, people just can't.
Yeah. Well, and like you said earlier, it may have started out as a social safety net system, but as our society changed, as the culture changed, as just the dynamics of work changed, it has now shifted into being a retirement asset. And
Yeah.
so that's a good point, I think, just to keep in mind as far as, oh, well, okay, they're raising the retirement age a couple of years. Well, sucks, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Well,
But I mean, imagine a huge portion of the population that, for one reason or another, can't work beyond age 62. Right.
yeah,
And if this age gets, it's already at 67, you move it to 69, what happens to these people in between time?
yeah,
We talked about a few episodes ago that about 12% of the population takes Social Security early because they have to. Well, of the people who take Social Security early, it's about 12% of the people took it because they had to. They needed that income. I would imagine that would, the number of people taking Social Security early would increase dramatically, which would also mean that the number of people who were receiving a reduced benefit, right, up to a 30% reduced benefit would increase dramatically. And imagine if you move the retirement age to 69, but you can still take it at 62. Right now, if your retirement age is 70 and you take it at 62, it's a 30% decrease in benefit. So if the retirement age is 69 and you take it at 62, that's probably going to be like a 40% reduction in your benefit.
Yeah.
So does that result in us paying less out? Yeah. But that results in people living on 60% of their benefit. It has people like, I just can't imagine how people are going to get by if that's what they're getting by on.
Yeah. It's a tough situation.
Yeah. All right. So that's the outflow side. How do we decrease the outflow? Means testing or increasing the retirement age. So there are proposals as well in terms of how do we increase the amount of money that's coming into Social Security. One, which is probably going to be the easiest one from a math perspective, is to increase the payroll cap. So the way Social Security taxes work now is only your first 160, I say only 160,000. I know the majority of people in the United States are not making $160,000. The average income in the US is like $43,000. But right now, the way it stands is anything you make above $160,200 does not get taxed for Social Security. So right now, we pay 6.2% of our income into Social Security. And your employer matches that with another 6.2%. So essentially, 12.4% of your income is going into the Social Security Trust Fund right now, right? But it caps out, right, at 160,200. So anything you make above that is not getting taxed for Social Security. So there's proposals for things like getting rid of that cap altogether, right? There's proposals for saying, kind of creating what they call a donut hole, which is, what if whatever the limit is now, that 160 to 250 does not get taxed for Social Security, but everything above 250 gets taxed, right? Or, another is to cap that at 400,000, right? So your first 160 is taxed, and then nothing between 160 and 400 is taxed for Social Security, and then everything above that is taxed for Social Security. So those kind of proposals are on the table right now.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, but so essentially it would be, what this suggestion would be, it would be lowering that cap to 43,000. So anything past 43,000?
No. 43,000 is just the average income right now.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, that's the average individual's earnings in the United States right now.
Okay. And so the 400,000, or sorry, anything above that 400,000 being taxed, like it sounds like a lot of this is posing essentially for people earning significantly higher than average incomes that past a certain threshold, those people start getting taxed for Social Security.
Right. So when I say right now, up to 160,000 of your income is being taxed, to the majority of Americans, that sounds like a lot of income being taxed. They're right. It is a lot of money. 160,000 a year is a lot of money. But if you think about it from a percentage of the population who's making this income, right? So right now, of individual filers in the US, only about 2.5% of the population makes over $250,000. So we're talking about taxing an income, right, above 250,000, and there's going to be a lot of people who are upset about it. But if I were a politician and thinking about who, the voting base, and I said 97.5% of the population, this is not going to affect.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that risk. The flip side of that is, if they do that, I got to imagine that while it's only 2.5% of the population that's making over that, people who are making over that are a very large portion of the population that are making political contributions.
That's what I was going to say. The political power held in that 2.5% is dangerously large.
Yeah. Which makes it tough, right? Because, it's like anything else. It's whatever you're hearing the most is sort of what feels like is most important. And, having that taxed, or having any income above $250,000 being taxed, to the majority of the population is not going to mean anything. But to the people who are going to be in the ear of these politicians, it is going to mean a lot, right?
Yeah.
And though that is who they're going to be listening to. But I'll tell you from a standpoint of what it would do to tax income above 250,000. So right now we have that $2.8 trillion surplus in the trust fund. It would increase that by $1 trillion, which means that Social Security would then be solvent into the late 2040s, right? So it would go a long way. Just that one step alone, not increasing the age, not doing any means testing, just that one step alone kind of I say pushes the ball or sort of, kind of, I can't think of the phrase, right? Like, what's it called? Kicks the can down the road. Right?
Yeah,
kicks the can down the road. I was gonna say pushes the ball down the field, but pushes the ball down the field is a positive, right? Kicks the can down the road is not a positive for some reason, but that's what it does. But that's the way Social Security is always going to be.
Yeah.
Social Security, we're always going to be kicking the can down the road as far as possible, and this would do that, right? So the other thing being discussed is instead of 250, doing that at 400,000, and that's less than 2% of the population. Now, if you looked at it from a household perspective, that's different. But remember, it's not, any household making over this, is any individual making over this. So less than 2% of the population making that. So again, the upside for the majority of the Americans is really, really big because it doesn't affect them at all. The downside is if you're doing really good for yourself, 6% of your income is going to be gone, right? Yeah. And I guess from a company perspective, if you have employees, that means you're going to be paying more taxes on anybody who is making a pretty good income that works for you as well, right?
True.
Yeah. I would say, we talk about, I don't know if we talk about it on podcasts or not on any of our episodes, but I know personally you and I talk about that businesses are always going to find ways to increase profit, right? And taxes is a huge piece of what brings profitability down, right? So you can guarantee that if we start taxing income above either one of those two thresholds, companies are not going to want to suddenly start paying 6.2% more, on all of that income above. So they're going to find ways to not do that, right? So they'll find ways to shift income. So it may be things like maybe not paying some of that money in income, but putting it into a retirement plan or something like that, right? Like they'll have to find ways to cut that. And instead of cutting only their employees that are making, instead of cutting their pay, cutting the high paid employees and putting that money into a retirement account, what they would probably do is sort of spread it out over everybody, right? And say, this is how we're going to pay everybody. So that way it doesn't affect your highly compensated, what you consider valuable employees to the company enough for them to leave the competition, right? I can see them doing that, but I guess if they did that, maybe it wouldn't be bad because they'd still be putting that money into some sort of retirement account probably, right? Which would be beneficial down the road. I don't know. But all that to say, I think the uproar would be loud from a very small segment of the population, right?
Yeah, I think it will definitely be interesting because that to me is just a perfect example of the dilemma that we run into with our political system. I'm sure the vast majority of countries run into it in their political system, but looking at a possible solution to a problem that benefits the large majority of the population. So that should seem like a pretty obvious, well, if it's benefiting nearly everyone in our country, should be something we should be doing. Then we're running into that dilemma of corporate interest, higher income individuals being the ones with typically the most sway and influence in politics. And so if this ends up gaining traction, I think it would be very interesting to see how that
could you imagine the amount of money that would be poured into convincing the other 97.5% of the population that them paying more taxes is bad for that? I shouldn't say them, right? I should say for the 2.5% of the population, how much money would be poured into trying to convince the other 97.5% of the population that the 2.5% paying more taxes is bad for the 97.5% of the population. You'll see a tremendous amount of money poured into ads and campaigns that say, hey, me paying more taxes is bad for you, right?
Media pieces about it's just downright un-American to be making them pay taxes.
Right. And again, I'm not advocating for or against, just trying to say what we will probably see if this starts to become a reality, right?
We joke around and stuff, but at the end of the day, like, it is the way our system and the majority of systems in the world work. And so we're just observing it in action.
Right, right. So one of the other things that they're talking about doing to increase the amount of money in this government, or not government, but Social Security trust fund, is to, instead of, well, a couple of things, right? But both essentially the same. One is, instead of always investing in government securities, is to allow the trust fund to invest like we invest as everyday people.
Oh boy.
Right.
Oh boy.
In theory, fantastic, right? Growth over the long term should be much higher on those types of investments versus government securities. We know that, right? But I think all you have to do is look at pensions to see what happens when you allow that to happen, right? So pensions are failing for all sorts of reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is when the 2008 financial crash happened and we found out just how risky their investments were, right? You're having people make decisions, right? That you're creating these boards and having people make decisions that sometimes people, I mean, they're getting sold on ideas on what to invest in, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes those ideas are just not good, right? And you're always dealing with emotions, right? So I don't know how you would create rules that would keep sort of the emotion and the greed out of it. Like, could you imagine if you were starting some sort of, whether it was an investment fund or investment project, and suddenly there were trillions and trillions of dollars that were available to be poured into investments, the number of people that would be lobbying to have, their investment vehicle be a piece of that. Right? Like, forget about trying to convince the American people to invest in whatever it is you have. Like, that's a lot of money, trillions and trillions of dollars to go into your investment. Like, I can't imagine the schemes that people would come up with.
Exactly. Like what you said earlier, like when the greed plays into it. I mean, to me, unless it feels like, unless you had very specific guidelines, very well-defined rules, structures, like investment protocol, whatever. If you didn't have that, I think it would be 100% guaranteed that you would almost immediately start seeing problems with the human greed factor bleeding in. Because exactly like you said, you could have some of the kindest, most generous people on the planet. You put them in a room and you give them access to trillions of dollars. I'll be the first to say, I have no idea what kind of person I would be with trillions of dollars. I want to believe I'd be a good person still. Money changes people at the end of the day. And so, I don't know, that scares me a little bit. The idea that somebody could be handling Social Security like they were handling the pensions in 2008.
Yeah, think about our clients now, right? Like, we take every one of their situations extremely personal, right? In terms of wanting to make sure that they're going to be fine, and that they're, that we're helping them have a secure retirement, right? And, either when markets are bad or, economic times are uncertain, I don't lose any sleep because I'm worried that, what we're doing for them is not good enough. But I do worry about how our clients are feeling about everything, right? And we're a small slice of this overall financial picture, right? Could you imagine if you were a person in charge of that for all of the United States?
I mean, that is what's bonkers to me, is just imagining some, Johnny Cash walking in here, just being the guy in charge of literally the U.S. Social Security.
Like, making sure the entire U.S. population is going to be okay when they have to stop working.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I guess there's people that are in charge of it now, right? Like, our elected officials are in charge of it, right?
But
maybe we should
being in charge
them.
of it like I'm just imagining a generic hedge fund manager just in charge of Social Security.
Yeah, right. Like, man, could you imagine the kickbacks that would be getting offered to whoever was in charge of deciding where money was going to go?
If you thought money and politics were in bed together already, this would just be the anniversary of it. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just,
it'd be nuts, right? So the other kind of piece to that that's kind of the same, but different, is instead of just saying, hey, now we're not restricted to, government securities, is actually allowing individuals to be in charge of how their money is invested.
Oh, okay. Kind of
Yeah,
like a 401k plan.
kind of. Yeah, kind of, right? Which pros, cons, right? Pros is yes, if everyone does the right things and can stay, keep emotions in check and just continually invest and not panic and do what we know, all the statistics show what the majority of people do, as the market cycles, and why most people have a hard time with investing. If somehow we could change that complete psyche in the United States and people could just keep it for the long term, but then also know what they're supposed to do when they actually hit retirement, right? Again, like very, very heavy constraints on this money. Yeah, it could work, right? But the reality is, if you let every individual be in charge of their account, I mean, it's a bit of a crapshoot, right?
I was
Either,
about to say it's Wild West territory almost.
yeah, either it's going to go fantastic or it's going to be terrible. Which I guess from a Social Security standpoint, either one of those is okay in terms of making Social Security last, right? Because if you think about, everybody's investments doing fantastic, let's say they limit it severely, like if you think about the FERS program, right, the Federal Employees Retirement System, they've essentially got like 4 or 5 choices, right? So it's very difficult for people to hurt themselves in their retirement system because they've limited the choices so much. So you do something similar to that, yeah, maybe it would happen, right? I forgot what the point I was going to. Oh, it would either go fantastic or terrible, right? So something like that, right? Like, yes, this is growing at a much more rapid pace because it's growing faster than the government securities or government bonds, right? That's fantastic. Creates a bigger surplus. Money lasts, indefinitely, right? If we had those, the sort of returns that the stock market makes over time, we would have no problems, right?
Yeah.
I guess the other way that it benefits Social Security, though, is if you tell people, but if this doesn't work out for you, you're going to have less, right? And now every individual is responsible for their own retirement. I mean, in theory, the government gets to say, look, I'm sorry, you know, I'm sorry that, whatever happened to your money, but like you took that risk on yourself.
Yeah, it's on you.
Yeah. Right. Which, again, in theory would take the responsibility off of the Social Security system. But in reality, we would still have millions and millions of people who didn't have the means to support themselves. And we as a country would have to come up with, how are we going to solve this problem? Which essentially
Yeah.
would end up meaning more taxes, right?
Yeah.
So we'd still have a huge problem. That, I know this sounds crazy as like an advisor who believes in investing, and that investing over the long term is going to end up being the best thing that you could possibly do. For this system, that is my least favorite option.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that, because, and what you just said, I think is important to think about, because you think, okay, again, Social Security made as a social safety net for people in need. If we were to move into this system of letting everybody have that personal responsibility and it went horribly wrong and you ended up with millions and millions of people that didn't have that after retirement money or retirement money, we would have to end up finding another solution, right? Like, it's not like, oh, well, it didn't go well. Bummer, scrap the whole project. Like, this is actively something that if they try out and experiment with it and that experiment doesn't go well, they're now in a position where not only have they messed up the Social Security system, but they now have to figure out a way to now provide support or a means of support to millions of
Yeah,
people.
it's at the cost, it going wrong is at the cost of millions and millions and millions of Americans, right?
Yeah.
Like, do I think the benefits would be fantastic? Yes, but the increased risk is tremendous,
Yeah.
right? And it's tough, when you think about individuals investing their own money, or even if the government decides how that money's invested, it's tough to take a social program and input components of the private sector into it, which is essentially what you would do, because you'd be investing in private projects and private companies, right? Even if they're public companies, we're talking about, when I say private, I mean non-government, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I look at other programs that do that, right? Um, you look at it, you look at our healthcare system, for example. One of the reasons it has problems is because we're trying to create this social program that uses private insurance companies to do so. We talk about it all the time that private companies, these insurance companies, they're in business to make a profit and to make as much profit as possible. That's how businesses operate. That's the nature of businesses, right? So when you try to marry a social program and with private business
For-profit
components
system.
to it, yeah,
Yeah.
for profit, like, man, it typically doesn't go very well, right? So
Yeah.
that's my least favorite option, right? But like most things, we talked about raising the retirement age, increasing the payroll cap, some means testing. Of those three, right? Even if you took away means testing, right? Which maybe there should be means testing, like, dude, I don't care if Zuckerberg or maybe it doesn't have to be, drastic, but like, dude, I don't care if these billionaires get Social Security. Like, man, they're fine, right? But you know, you think about the other two things, raising the age and increasing the payroll cap. And I know the payroll cap increases slightly every year, right?
Yeah.
But those two things, like if we got more aggressive with the payroll cap and increase the retirement age, by just a small amount instead of a big leap, I always feel like multiple tweaks in small amounts can have just as big of an effect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the burden or the change of those tweaks is not nearly as drastic to
Yeah.
individuals.
Just small ripples each time that you make the small change as opposed to big splash with like a big shift.
Yeah. So that's it, right? I think I don't know. Is there anything else we need to cover on this topic?
I don't think
Any
so.
other
I mean,
thoughts?
I really the only thing I was going to say is I mean, it seems like there are not necessarily obvious, but there are several possible solutions, several possible ways that the government could go about mitigating the problem. And so I think really it's just going to be a matter of whether they take action or not and how
It's
soon.
political will. Do they have
Yeah.
the political will to do it? Right. And I know, right, if you tell someone, hey, we're going to fix this by raising taxes, or hey, we're going to fix this by raising the age, essentially taking away some of the benefits you're entitled to currently, right? Or we're going to have a means test that means that you are that it's not going to be, it's not going to be as connected how much you put in versus how much you get out. Or I know that those things are not going to be popular.
Yeah.
Right. Just like taxing Social Security when they decided to do it was not popular. Right. And I'm sure some political heads rolled at that time. I'm sure some people never got elected again at that time. Right.
Yeah.
I think Reagan probably benefited. It happened early in his administration, and then we had like this boom in economic times. And I think that boom after it happened helped enough people forget that, hey, we started taxing you on your Social Security, right? So I guess that something like that could happen again. But like, could you imagine if we make these changes to Social Security and then we fall on tough economic times? Man, the
Yeah.
blame game is going to be enormous.
Yeah.
You know,
Especially, I mean, I think, and like you said, it's going to require political will because I think since they have no guarantee of, oh, well, if we do this, we know that in X amount of time, we'll see the economic upturn. Like because of the unknowns, it almost is going to require a level of willingness to say, hey, this could be political suicide. This could be me
yeah,
throwing myself off a bridge politically, but it needs to be done. So
right.
I think it'll be interesting to see if there's any politicians that are willing to uh, make that exchange.
Yeah, we'll see, man. I don't think there are right now. I feel like everybody, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, everybody's in it to get reelected, right?
Yeah,
Um, we'd have to have enough people that were, tired of being in office, push it through, probably. You
yeah,
know,
just on the way out.
yeah. I don't know. So it can be fixed, right?
Yeah,
The
I think
fix is,
that's the important thing. Like it can be fixed. It's more a matter of will they do it, when will they do it, and will they do it
yeah,
before it's too late.
yeah. I hate using the term fixed because that implies that something's wrong. Like
Yeah,
they said, like something is wrong with Social Security, or we did something wrong with Social Security. it's not that Social Security needs to be fixed, it's that the shortfall needs to be fixed, because the things that are causing the shortfall are not because of bad decisions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, baby boomers being a large portion of our population, medical advances and people living longer, declining birth rates, like those aren't things that, that no laws were passed to make that happen.
In
right?
China, there were.
But it didn't affect the U.S. Social Security system. At least I don't think so. Maybe we could do some research, right? Like maybe we could see if AI could make the connection between the China's one-child policy and our Social Security system.
If anyone could figure it out, it would be AI.
Yeah, it's crazy and scary, right?
Oh, that should be a whole episode. We don't want to open up that Pandora's box.
Has anybody gotten on ChatGPT and said, how do we fix the Social Security problem without doing these 4 things? And see what it comes up with.
I'm going to do that after we're done.
Maybe that's all we needed to do. Maybe we just needed to enter that prompt into ChatGPT. Our Social Security problem would be solved. Like, why hasn't anybody thought about that yet?
Can we just elect ChatGPT as a politician?
Well, I mean, we're joking about this, but like on 60 Minutes the other night, they were showing this AI program, this AI chess program, right? And how it started running, and by the end of the day, it could beat any chess champion, right?
Yeah.
It was talking about why it did it, and it was just because of repetition, practice, right? Same way we get better. The more we practice, the more situations we see, the more we know what to do. And this AI had come up with chess strategies that had never happened before, right? It did the same thing with soccer. Like,
wow.
they input nothing other than the goal of the game is to get this ball in the goal on the opposite side of you, right? That's all they told it. And, the number of players, all that kind of stuff. It was creating crazy soccer strategies, right?
That's
and
wild.
Offensive strategies, defensive, like everything. Nuts. But same thing with chess. And it's because, like, in seconds, it can simulate millions and millions and millions of games. It's just repetition. It can just practice faster than we can. Right?
Exactly.
So it could run millions and millions and millions of what ifs with Social Security.
Yeah.
All right. So point. maybe we'll have it solved. Maybe we'll use AI to solve this by next week.
Easy. Yeah.
Well, no problem.
Yeah.
All right, man. Let's wrap this up. All right. So we talked about the coming shortfall or the shortfall that we're facing, why we're facing it, the reasons that we're facing it, which, not from mishandling by the government, not because of undocumented immigrants. It's because we have a lot of people taking it. We've got fewer people paying into it, or not fewer people paying into it, but as a percentage of the population, fewer people paying into it. And we're living longer. Fantastic that we're all living longer. Not great for Social Security. And then, the fixes right now, the proposals are to raise the retirement age, increase the payroll cap, do some means testing, or allow it to invest in different ways. All right. We'll see what happens, right? Maybe we'll get an update at some point in terms of what our elected officials have decided to do about this problem. But for right now, it's all just speculation.
And if we get anywhere with ChatGPT, we'll reach out to the senators and let them know, hey, we figured it out.
They're listening. They're listening.
Well, yeah. What am I saying?
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Abbott, thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you again soon.